Thanks everybody who joined in already. Thank you so much for joining our conversation. First of all, I'm super excited to share screen space with Avnish. Looking forward to the chat, and I think we'll get started in just a bit. In the meantime, maybe I'll do a very quick introduction to what we do at Zomentum. We're a revenue platform essentially for SaaS partnership teams to build their co-sell motions and drive revenue with partners. So we're all partnership folks ourselves, and we go after some of the biggest challenges in this space, right? I mean, if you can relate to poor partner portal adoptions or not getting visibility into partner pipeline, or just wanting to, proactively co-sell with partners, I'd be more than happy to indulge in a chat. If you want to have a conversation about your partner programs, give us a shout. More than happy to take those conversations. I think we can get started. Maybe we can ease into some introduction of Avnish as well. I don't think Avnish needs an introduction to an audience of partnership folks. I don't think it's necessary, but as things go, we'll probably start off with a very quick introduction. So Avnish has been a mentor to us from like day zero, right? Just like he is a mentor and advisor, and he also invests in a lot of startups. I can think of Airtable, Avni, Eightfold, and a bunch of other startups. I'm sure you can look up all the projects that Avnish spends his time on. He has retired, but he's still probably the most busiest person that's going around. He currently serves on the board of HubSpot. Previously, he's been credited with building the ecosystems partnership ecosystems, of course, at Salesforce, ServiceNow, Google, Demandbase, no less. So that's Avnish. Thank you so much for joining in, Avnish. Super grateful to have you here.
Hey, Raghav, a real pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the kind words. Much appreciated. It's fun. This is an area that I think, just broadly, as we look forward, I think there's a lot of interesting and exciting work to be done, and thrilled to be involved with the Zomentum as well. I think you guys are, creating something pretty powerful here. So delighted to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Avnish. I think we can get started off. Maybe I'll give you a very quick overview on the format itself, right? It's going to be very conversational, no PPTs, no product plugs, none of that. So it's going to be a warm conversation. and in the spirit of this conversation, the themes, the questions have been largely driven, or if you will, outsourced, right, to the partnership folks themselves. So we've got a lot of engagement from our social media handles, Slack, and other groups. So we've got a bunch of questions that have come through from the community. So that's essentially the direction we will take as well. And for everybody who've joined in, there is the Q&A option on your Zoom panel. We will take questions throughout the next 30-35 minutes, right? So feel free to keep the questions coming in, and we'll take as many questions as we can. If we don't have time, I will make sure to position those questions to Avnish so that he can answer those questions. And so that we get back to you on that as well. Awesome. So let's get started. First of all, Avnish, just to set the stage, right? I mean, from the mainframe era to today in the cloud era, right? You've been around for a while. You've seen the evolution of channel ecosystems. Can you talk to us about the GTM landscape today and where partnerships come into the picture?
Yeah, look, for sure. And I think we're living at a pretty interesting intersection of both macro elements and frankly, I think also changes in how investors, operators, etc., are thinking about go-to-market. So what do I mean about that? So you set the context earlier, right? I joined Salesforce in 2009. And in 2009, frankly, Salesforce was a bit less than $1 billion. We barely, and I do mean barely, had any kind of partner ecosystem. We did selling ourselves. We did the marketing mostly ourselves. We had some integrations, but we didn't have a SI network or a very small SI network. We didn't have any of the GSIs really involved with us, etc. But as time evolved, just to use that as an example, now Salesforce touts I think they call it the Salesforce economy, and some numbers put it at over $1 trillion, not just what Salesforce sells, but around Salesforce. How do the partners enrich that experience, and how do the partners drive more value to the customer? And the partners in this case, really is a mix of like technology partners, ISVs, resale partners, MSPs, SIs, GSIs, I mean, you name it, right? So when we talk about the spectrum of channel relationships and channel partnerships, I think the world has changed a lot, right? And not to take all the credit, but Salesforce was probably a bit early in helping define that. But since then, I think, again, in the cloud offerings or SaaS offerings, it takes a bit of a different flavor, right? You have to have a tight coupling, right? You can't dissociate yourself like you did in the old days from Oracle or SAP and so on, where you would ship software and ship it on a CD or DVD, and someone else would take it and implement it in very arm's length. Now these are tight relationships. And bringing it back to your question, I think when we think of the macro, right? Look, whether we like it or not, whether it is self-fulfilling or not, which is my opinion, and we are going into a bit of a slowdown, right? We've been growing. Many entrepreneurs, many investors, many companies have never seen a slowdown. I'm old enough to have been around in the early 90s, late 90s, 2008, 2009. It's fine, right? These things will happen. But I think what it does create is an opportunity, and I do mean opportunity, to rethink how do you invest your resources? How do you invest the right way to maximize the investments you're making, whether in product, whether in go-to-market, whether in partnerships and so on. And here I do feel, and you can, you'll see a lot of articles from, pretty respected analysts like Jay McBain, formerly from Forrester, now with Canalys and others, basically saying, look, as we go forward, this is the decade of the ecosystem, right? And the ecosystem is all those things I described earlier: tech, strategic partners, SIs, GSIs, resellers, MSPs, you name them. The decade of the ecosystem is here. Why? Because one, it allows us to scale in what I call a non-linear fashion. Right? So that outlook of saying, hey, we can actually build a broader ecosystem that we don't need to make the investment in all the headcount and all the sales, everything else. Let's bring partners who understand the landscape. Maybe they have the right kind of people already in place. And in exchange for a certain percentage, they're bringing us into places where we don't have to make our own investments. Number one. Number two, they have relationships, and I can't tell you how much of that is a critical factor, right? Those incumbent relationships from service providers, from SIs, GSIs, are worth a lot. They're not going away, right? We don't. Let's not think we can disrupt those. So how do we manage that? How do we leverage that? And third, frankly, I think there's an opportunity to go into new markets, whether through a reseller channel, whether through a set of boutique service providers and so on, that opens doors that otherwise it'd be a lot harder for us to open. So across all those, I think we're living at a terrific opportunity to build the strategy and then execute on an ecosystem framework. That was a longer answer than you wanted, probably, but as you can tell, I'm kind of passionate about this.
I think you touched on a bunch of different themes, right? About investing in partnerships. Like there was a bunch of questions that came, so I definitely wanted to position some of them in terms of investment, but we'll get to that in a bit. Yep. But you did mention the climate as well, right? And in today's climate, if you look at the number of companies that actually have a partner program or a partner first strategy, it's almost often an afterthought, right? You suddenly think, okay, what this can I do? Maybe I can look at partners. But I'm very curious to understand, especially given the climate of today, where does partnerships come in, and where can they help B2B SaaS companies in their growth strategy?
Yeah, no, a great point. And I think what I'm observing, and you mentioned that I'm advising some companies and so on, and what I am seeing firsthand is that this is increasingly becoming a board level and C-suite issue. This is not an experiment to say, hey, let's go try something. Let's, not a big deal. This is becoming core to the strategy, right? And by core, I mean, if you really think broadly about the ecosystem strategy, the part that gets me excited about it is it actually involves product, it involves marketing, it involves sales, it involves customer success, and of course, it involves a partnership team. So for it to be orchestrated and for it to be executed, I don't think it's to be done right. I don't think it's hey, let's just hire someone and make it 25% of their time to go figure this out, right? I think it really has evolved to being core, and exactly to the point we were discussing earlier. How can I apply a kind of a strategic framework or really an ecosystem strategy and figure out as part of my overall go-to-market, right? Where should I prioritize? What investments do I need to make in, is my product ready, right, to be implemented, distributed, built upon by a third party? Fundamental question, right? So that's one element of it. But two really is thinking through that mix of participants in that ecosystem. You can't do it all at once. And this is something I tell everybody. If you try to do all of those things at once, you're going to fail, right? You have to think about, how do you prioritize? What are the biggest challenges you're having? And from there, figure out which class of relationships or which relationships do you really need to invest in first versus which ones you can, create a plan, right? And I always, I'm a big fan of crawl, then walk, then run, right? So you crawl first, identify what are some of those early wins. So let's use a couple of examples. Let's say that you're a venture-backed company, and there's pressure from the board. Say, hey, let's be a little bit more thoughtful about where we spend resources. So one area to start could be services, right? So your services ecosystem is maybe the place where you start and you say, we've been doing all of our implementations, configurations, etc. ourselves, but now we think we can, entice maybe 3, 4, 5 partners who can help us with that implementation, and they can drive the right kind of outcomes. That's an example of where, again, being focused on the, and again, I think of that as completely as part of go-to-market. It's not just something that'll happen after the fact. Those partners have relationships. They may have, done prior implementations, prior sales, prior resales into those accounts. And therefore, being very thoughtful about what is that sequencing, what is that prioritization. I think that's the first step, which is why are we doing this? And, how do we make sure we are prioritizing before we kind of spread ourselves too thin and frankly then fail across all the fronts?
Absolutely. I think you spoke about two themes, right? There's product and there's people. I'll probably start off from the more important part, which is people, right? And I know you've spoken about this outside as well. I've read a bunch of your articles and your thoughts on this particular aspect. But I thought it'd be beneficial for you to share your thoughts on what it takes to build, right, a best-in-class partner management teams. And I know you have learnings from your time at all of these big companies that we spoke about. But yes, the question is, how do you go about building a best-in-class partner management team?
Yeah, look, that is something I am personally very proud of, and probably some of the proudest moments of my career are in helping. And again, it's not one person, so it's a broad team effort to build the team, to figure out what is the right mix of skills, of backgrounds, of then of course, how do you help them be successful? So when I look back at the lessons learned from many years of doing this, there's a few core things that come to mind. One, a best-in-class team really, first and foremost, is going to be thinking about this in a whole solution perspective, right? They're not thinking about this as a silo, and this is my objectives, my targets, and that's why I said earlier, the part I like really about this ecosystem strategy is you have to be able to connect with product, with marketing, with sales, with customer success If you're going to be successful in this function, you have to be cross-functional, right? So I think people who do well have that mindset, which is I'm looking at it broadly. I need to make sure that I align across all these different functions, because otherwise it actually doesn't really work. Number one. Number two, look, again, without offending anybody, I think there was a class of BD people and partner managers in the old days who kind of, were very siloed. They were really good at GSIs, or they were really good at ISVs. They're maybe really good in one function. Now those lines are blurring. And so you have to be internally aligned, but when you look outwards, you also have to think about, hey, if I'm going to work with let's say a GSI, a global SI, could be Accenture, could be Deloitte, could be KPMG, could be EY, could be one of the big Indian firms like Infosys or TCS. Guess what? They're no longer playing themselves in one single function, right? Yes, we call them a GSI, global SI. They also build product. They're reselling. They're also an MSP. So the people who are good at this have to think it from the internal point of view, align across all the functions, but also for the partnerships that they're pursuing or building or managing, how do you think of it from their point of view? How do you empathize with the GSI and say, hey, here's a portfolio of offerings that you can build. You can build a service offering, but hey, you have an MSP business. This may work well for an MSP. And for Zementum, MSPs are a big part of the strategy, as an example, right? Doesn't apply to everybody, but it's one element. You can build product, right? A lot of them are looking to package their IP. So the person who's going to be successful in this kind of role has to be able to switch those hats and be able to say, look, if I put myself in the shoes of my partner, prospective partner, it's not a single role, not a single function, not a single activity. I'm going to be able to orchestrate in their organization, right? How to optimize what they do with us, right? So that's number two. And number three, and this probably is one of the most critical ones, is this has to be measurable, right? It's no longer sufficient just to say, hey, look, I did the partnership, I signed the agreement, someone else's problem. Now it is a continuous effort. And why? Again, I'm going to make a guess here. The majority of the attendees are probably in a SaaS or cloud company. Okay?
More or less, yes.
More or less, right? It's reasonable assumption in 2022. Take that into account. How is our business measured in these cases? It's measured not just on what we sell, it's measured on renewals, it's measured on customer success, it's measured on NPS. These are metrics that frankly didn't exist 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you just sold, you moved on, right? Now you have to sell, come back, make sure they're getting value, make sure they're getting ready to renew, make sure that renewal is happening with growth. When you put all that together, the partner ecosystem across all the things we talked about, and we can go deeper into that, plays a critical role. Did we deliver value? Well, guess what? The SI or GSI or services partner plays a role in that. Are they going to grow? Well, maybe part of the growth is going to come from expanding the footprint in areas that we don't do ourselves, but we have these ISV partners that help extend the workflow. Well, guess what? I got to bring those in. Are we going to expand into a new geography, perhaps? Well, guess what? Now you got reseller partners. So as you think about that strategy, the person, the people who are successful in this function are really looking at it internally cross functions, in their partners across all the different capabilities, and then frankly, making sure that it's a continuous relationship. It's not a transactional relationship.
Absolutely. And you touched on quite a few things, right? You spoke about increased retention, because the retention is a big part of what most of the folks here are looking at as well. We also now know that partner-led opportunities or partner-led deals have an higher ACV. They are retained for longer. There's more value for the end clients. So that said, with that being the premise, how does the economics of partnerships work today in the larger annual planning or your GTM landscape? How can you talk to us about the partner economics itself?
Yeah, again, I think it ties back to that strategy and prioritization question, right? Different parts of the partner ecosystem, and I think we had to look at it from 2 points of view, right? One is if you're building the partner ecosystem, how do the economics of different types of relationships work? The reseller economics are going to be different than your MSP economics, which may be different than your ISV/tech partner economics. But you also look at it from the other side, which is, am I as a vendor going to participate in someone else's ecosystem? Am I going to be part of a marketplace? Am I going to be participating in AWS or GCP or App Exchange and so on? So the economics, obviously, and this is another area where the leadership function of the partner team has to align with all those functional areas we talked about, but also with finance, right? What is my business plan look like? You have to have a business plan, right? It's not just I have 3 logos I'm going to get. You have 3 logos, fantastic. What are you going to do with them? What does a joint business plan look like with those relationships? A business plan will have a top line element to it, which is how many deals, what kind of economics for the deal. Excuse me. And then with that also, what kind of coverage model am I going to put in place, right? So the economics, there's deal economics, and then there's team economics, which is, maybe it's a key global relationship. I may have a global relationship manager with that partner. I may have 2, 3, 4 regional partner managers based on kind of our focus geographies or maybe industries. And I might have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 technical resources, right? So you have to look at it holistically. And the role of the leadership, the leadership team really is to look at that, not just at the unit economics of a particular deal, which I think is part of the question, but to look at it holistically, right? And what does the overall business look like with that partner? And by the way, the times I've done this, you should be looking at this from a 3-year, maybe even 5-year perspective, right? What does that business plan look like? What is in it for the partner? What are those different motions? And when do those kick in? Not everything is going to kick in from day one. And then the partnership economics become very clear, right? So example, let's say you're a mid-sized vendor and you're working with you have interest from a global SI. Well, they're going to make an investment. You're going to make an investment. They're looking to see, hey, can in 2-3 years, can this become a $100 million business? Let's just say for an example, as an example. In order to get to the $100 million business to them, what is the economics of each of the categories of service lines, the MSP business, the IP, productization business, etc. That kind of becomes your framework. And that also helps determine, what does that crawl, walk, run look like, right? So to get to 100 million, here's where we need to make investments. Here's the investments they need to make, investments we need to make, people, technology, readiness, enablement, etc. So it becomes it's a pretty comprehensive approach that has to be taken to understand the economics. And of course, again, make sure that there's the right commitments on both sides or across all the different sides to get there. Does that help?
No,
happy to go more deeper or
No, absolutely. I mean, there was a question as well, and some conversations, personal analogies in terms of carving out budgets, right, for partnership teams and partner functions. One of the common rebuttals is it's hard to justify budgets when the ROI is going to take much longer.
Yep.
So my question is the expectations, right? Where are the expectations of the leadership when they're carving out these budgets for partnership teams, and say the audience as partnership leaders, for example? and what is the expectation? How do they go about? What are they tracking? What are they measuring? When set up against having to balance revenue and having to balance long-term growth, how does that work?
Yeah, that is, I think, great, great summary of I think what is probably happening in a lot of organizations, right? Which is, okay, let's be honest. If someone says, I need, I'll just use it, I need 10 people in my partner organization to be effective across these priority areas. Someone who is a CFO, someone who is a CRO, it may look at that and say, well, I can put 10 people in partnerships, or I can put 10 people in sales. And in sales, I have a formula that says those 10 people, they'll be productive within somewhere between 90 and 180 days, and they'll generate X per head with some ramp, with some, obviously not everybody's going to perform at the same level, but I can get a pretty clear picture. We've been doing that for decades, so there is a pretty clear sense for by segment, by experience, by tenure, etc. What outcomes you can get. The partnership area is, and I mentioned this when you asked me about the, what does it take to be a good, good effective person in this world, right? That metrics piece is still somewhat, let's be honest, a bit fuzzy, right? So the way I think about this and the way I coach people on this is, look, first and foremost, there has to be a fundamental belief, and this is not just at the C-suite. It has to happen at the board level. It has to happen at the C-suite. It has to happen, across the organization. That this, in fact, gives us that nonlinear growth. And that's job one, is getting that alignment. If you don't have that alignment, it is really hard. Because then no matter what you do, no matter what the spreadsheets you put together, no matter what models you bring up, people are not going to believe you. Right? So I think the metrics and how you present that, you have to borrow from other examples. I obviously use the stories where I've been participating myself and say, look, this is the kind of growth that we achieved in company A versus B versus C. And this was the fundamental beliefs when we started. This is how we kind of helped the rest of the organization align. But here's how the business evolved, right? And I think it takes that type of, frankly, storytelling, getting the belief among your peers and the rest of the organization that yes, making this investment, one, it is a long game. So anybody who's thinking, hey, I'm going to put this partnership team in place in June, and I'm expecting to see, top line results by December, sorry to say, but you're probably going to be disappointed, because it takes time, right? This is, again, you have to build a relationship, you have to enable them, you have to drive, the joint, we talk about joint business planning. Well, that's a framework, but then once you have the business plan, you need to go execute on that. Those things don't happen overnight, right? So I think there has to be a fundamental belief, number one, that in the long term, medium to long term, this is going to pay off, right? And there's a lot of examples where it has. And again, like everything else, there's probably places where it hasn't quite worked out. So that's number one. Number two, I think to your point about how do you measure, I think the measurements are a little bit different along the journey, right? So being very thoughtful about, again, I mentioned earlier, prioritization. If you come to me with a plan that says we're going to do everything in the first 6 months and I'm going to get 5 different class of partners off the ground, I'll probably call BS on that, because it's just not, one, it's not realistic. Two, it's not the right thing to do. But someone who can say, look, here's the opportunity, and we're going to pursue, three GSIs, or maybe 2 GSIs, and we're going to build, for particular, maybe 1 or 2 countries that are very important for us. We're going to identify one or 2 resellers, and then we're not going to do anything with, let's say, with tech or ISVs, because we need investments in product. Having that level of clarity on the sequencing and the metrics is important. And by the way, getting the 2 GSIs to engage, will take 6, 9, maybe even longer months. Once I have that, my crawl phase, that's my crawl phase. Then my walk phase is going to be, putting together a set of target account lists, filtered by geography, by industry, by relevance, etc. And that's going to become a pretty specific set of joint targets, right? And that is going to take X number of quarters or months to align around. And by the way, call it year 2, year 3, we're going to close of those, 20 accounts we identified, we'll be in POCs in 3 of them, and we may have a deal with 2 of them. That's the level of granularity that I think has to be put in place. And again, it will never be perfect, but it should give everybody the confidence that by taking these actions, engaging in those kind of relationships, you can get into accounts and customers that otherwise would be a lot harder to get into.
Awesome, thank you. By the way, just a note out to everybody who's listening in. I will start picking out questions from the Q&A. I see a few have come in. I'll probably take one now. Although I do have a couple more things I want to ask you as well. There's one question about, I think it's from Gokul. He says, there is a huge complexity in making channel partners and to train them in SaaS B2B products, where we do solution selling for SMBs. Can we adopt only reseller models with partners who can just generate leads and the rest can be taken care by OEMs? Do you have any inputs on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty specific question, I think, to certain categories or segments. I think ultimately the answer is yes, right? It is, again, part of that strategy definition and the focus is saying, hey, we sell into this segment. In this segment, the buyer, the ideal customer profile is X. The customer is an SMB. They're not going to be doing, a huge amount of configuration and customization. So but however, they do have these existing relationships with their kind of the neighborhood reseller, who is kind of their, for lack of a better word, is their maybe their IT person, right? Just to put a face to it. So yes, that's fine. You can help them create not a reseller model. It could be a referral model. You can give them a referral fee, but realizing that you're going to have to do most of the selling, and they're really helping you with the tip of the spear, identify potential opportunities, and that the rest of the engagement, from selling to delivery to customer success, is not part of their purview. So there are different ways of optimizing, what the right, and that's why that first piece of which set of partners for which segments and for what kind of priorities, I think becomes absolutely critical.
Absolutely. And there's another question, right, about mistakes. What are the biggest mistakes that you've faced or you've done that we want to avoid in scaling partner programs? The one thing that comes to the top of my mind immediately from having all of these conversations the last year and a half is spreading yourself too thin by going on an acquisition rampage, but not nearly engaging your partners as much. That's one thing I've seen as a common theme across most partnership orgs that I've seen. But of course, from your experience, right, in Salesforce and Google and Demandbase and others, what are the big mistakes that you would want to avoid?
Oh, I never made mistakes. No, just kidding. No, and I think we only have half hour, right? So we probably won't cover all of them. But I think it is along, frequently it's along the lines of what you were saying, right? Which is you spread yourselves too thin, right? You try to do too many things at the same time with, not enough capacity, not enough resources. And then you find that your partners are getting frustrated and they're not executing. And then your end customers are not really getting what they, need, right? often spending too much time going out and recruiting and pursuing partners.
Hey, Avnish. I think Avnish is stuck. Just fixing up his side. Give me just a second. Yep, Avnish is joining right back. Oh, thank you for that. I was just saying that we have a bunch of different questions that have come up. We will try to answer most of these questions, but in case we're not able to answer all of these questions, we will loop in Avnish on an email, and so that he can address those questions. I also see a lot of hands raised. Unfortunately, we will not be having audio tuned in, but you can ask your questions away using the Q&A feature, and we'll make sure to answer it either live or on email as a follow-up right after. And I think Avnish is just giving me a call, so I'll be back as well. Give me a minute.
Hey, Raghav.
Hey, Avnish. Hi again.
Oh man, this is unfortunately, I'm not exactly sure what has happened, but both my networks are down, so I'm on my phone. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely fine. It works.
Sorry about that.
In the meantime, I
Hopefully.
was answering your question, and we've had a huge amount of questions come in as well.
Okay.
But yes, we were talking about mistakes, and you
Yeah.
were got cut off there.
Yeah, sorry about that. And again, this is Silicon Valley 2022. Our infrastructure is not quite.
Happens to the best of us, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and definitely happens during a webinar, right? Which is the worst part. Anyway, so look, yeah, continuing on the kind of the mistakes front, right? So I think we talked about first one being spread too thin. Second one is not spending enough time aligning internally, right? I think that is something, if I had to go back and do it again, I would do more of that up front. And I think the question you asked way earlier, which was, how do you make sure you get all the people who may not either understand it or believe it, spending time with them and making sure that they're fully on board is, I think, number two. And then number three, again, I think being very, very cognizant of the impact, and I think you have to be very metrics driven. And this is a topic that I think in the early days of BD and partnership and so on, people were a little bit, frankly, loosey-goosey about it. And what I often see when I see some ideas and plans is that level of specificity of, again, the examples I was giving, which partners, in which categories, in which locations, and kind of that level of detail, and then being held accountable to that, I think is the other thing that often I still don't see enough of. And I think it's fundamental because, hey, the rest of the organization is being metrics driven, right? And again, there's a lot of hard data that drives decision making, resource allocation, prioritization, etc. And that same level of rigor and insight and scrutiny, I think, needs to apply to the partnership organization as well. So those would be, for me, three big areas to focus on. None of them is easy, but I think it's kind of what helps, build credibility and build successful plans.
Perfect. And I've got loads of questions to pick from. I'm going to pick one which is very, very tactical, which is not very strategic, but it's about, it's an anonymous attendee as well. It says, how do we handle, or do we have a best strategy for partners who are interested or already selling our competitors as well?
I mean, look, there's no perfect answer, right? Because let's take again, you can take a GSI, you can take a reseller. Chances are that nobody's been doing exclusives, right? So it's not a if, it's a how do you behave in those situations, And my answer is somewhat, trite, but look, you have to be a better product. You have to be a better relationship. They have to be wanting to work with you rather than your competition, right? So I look at that as opportunity, which is it forces you, if you're looking at those kind of relationships, it should force you to say, look, why would that partner and ultimately the customer choose me plus the partner rather than choose a partner plus my competitor, right? And that could be, yes, I have a better product. Yes, I provide a better overall experience. Yes, I am more empathetic. Yes, the economics work out better, maybe for the partner. There's a lot of variables, and there's no single answer, but it's figuring out why, why will their sales team or delivery team choose to work with you over the competitors? And just like any customer can choose you, many of your competitors, that partner has that choice too. You have to make it worth their while.
Absolutely. I think that's something that we've recognized from day zero as well. If you see the Zomato marketplace, right, where partners get to choose different vendors that they can work with. And each category, there could be multiple different vendors providing different solutions, right? But the difference is vendor A plus partner and vendor B plus partner aren't the same things. It's about the relationships and it's about how we go to market together. Absolutely. Thanks for answering that. There are a couple more questions. I'll probably take one here, and then I have another question as well. One is from a AWS Azure space. Can you expand on disruption caused by marketplaces like GCP, AWS, Azure? What would be the impact of this, whether positive or negative, on the ecosystem as such?
Yeah, no, that is it's a big change that's happening in particularly with the cloud vendors. And I have never seen something take on so fast. So let me maybe take a minute and describe a bit of the context for those who may not be completely familiar. So the big infrastructure vendors, AWS, Azure, GCP, have actually built substantial businesses. The numbers are staggering. I mean, GCP, where I was for a few years, went from 4 billion to now it's on a 26 billion run rate in about 4 years time frame, right? Microsoft, I think, is across all its cloud businesses is approaching 60 or 70 billion, and GCP and AWS might be approaching 100 billion. These are big numbers. Now, underlying those numbers are the fact that they're doing massive deals with end customers where the proposition is we, the vendor, in this case, AWS, GCP, Microsoft, are going to help you migrate a big part of your workload from on-prem and from maybe older technology stacks to modern cloud-based infrastructure and stacks. In that deal construct, what they're really doing is they're requesting the customer to make a commitment. And sometimes that could be a 3-year, 5-year, maybe even a 10-year commitment that says, from an infrastructure perspective, which is compute, storage, networking, egress and ingress costs of data and so on. Here's how we're going to model your transition from current to future. But that doesn't convert into revenue until that end customer actually deploys applications and consumes that infrastructure that was committed. Okay, so with these mega deals that are happening from the infrastructure vendors, they're now collectively using their marketplaces as a way to expose the end customer to partner solutions that are available in the marketplace, where they can be discovered, they can be transacted, they can be deployed very seamlessly. Once they're transacted in the marketplace, that helps the end customer burn down commits. So those big commits they made, they can now use ISV third-party solutions to burn those down. That has taken off as wildfire because now it makes it both economically important, operationally, and from a deployment perspective, that experience starts to become a lot more seamless. Someone can say, hey, I want to move, this big ERP to the cloud. Can I get my core databases, from that marketplace? It's going to burn down my commit that I made, and it's not coming directly from the vendor, it's coming from their partner ecosystem. So the projections are that these marketplaces are going to grow, dramatically, and that, I've seen some data that says in 5 years from now, 60, 70, or even 70% of core enterprise buying for software may happen through marketplaces. That's staggering, right? And there are a lot of services that those marketplaces are offering or will continue to offer that help make that experience very seamless. So I think it's a big part of the future. I think making the understanding, again, which of the infrastructure vendors matter to your business and to your joint customer base, figuring out what those relationships need to look like, figuring out what the economics are. There's a bit of a cost to participate. Those are important decisions to make as part of the mix. I haven't included marketplaces in a mix of different forms of channel relationships, but it's certainly one of them is the hyperscalers and their marketplaces.
Thanks for doing that, Avanish. We'll probably do one or probably two questions at the max. I think there's one which has been echoed by multiple people, so I think I'll probably ask that, which is around the timing of when you should start a channel program, right? When are you ready for a channel program? I think there's a lot of people asking the same question. So yeah, go for it.
I wish there was a single answer to that, right? So I think you have to be. It's not from day zero, right? I think especially. So let's take a few examples. If you're a early stage venture-backed company, you need to prove product market fit, right? So the early customers, all the way to Series A, maybe even to part of Series B, you have to be, the customer relationship is super critical, and you have to understand what are they, what are their real problems? Are you solving them well? What is the experience they're having in working with you from a engagement, from a deployment, from a configuration, from a services, etc. So anybody who says, I'm a brand new company and I want to build a channel program, I think you have to take that with a bit of care. It could be that you're in a particular business, as someone asked earlier, it's SMB only, and that's the distribution they want. That may make sense. But if it's a more high touch engagement model, I think early cycles, you want to be pretty hands-on, because that is where you're getting proof points for your product market fit, right? So, however, if you're later stage, then I think that discussion that we had in the beginning of the conversation and throughout, which is, what are some of those knobs that I feel, because of the economics, because of the reach, because of the scale that I need to get to, what are some of those knobs that a partner ecosystem can help me either accelerate or reduce my cost of acquisition or cost of sale right? And think about that again in a very thoughtful, prioritized, strategic manner. So I think when you start getting to Series C, when you start thinking about, hey, we're hitting 50, 75, 100 million in ARR, and now I need to think about scale, that I think is the right time. Secondly, I think that readiness that we talked about, right? It has to be, again, this is not just someone waking up and saying, yeah, I'm going to build a partner ecosystem. Right? Is your product ready? Is it, do you, let's say it's for an ISV relationship. Do you have the APIs? Do you have documentation? Are you ready to support not just an end customer, but also a software company that's probably going to be more demanding about, how do you expose the APIs? How do you manage security? How do you manage performance? Do you have SLAs? Do you have a contract that allows them to operate under all kinds of questions that are not just, for the partner manager, but the product organization has to be equally invested in it and committed to it, right? So I think those are the kind of questions from a strategy perspective. So again, there's no single answer. I think increasingly this is becoming part of a kind of a strategic set of decisions that have to be thought through, and the investments that need to be made to make it happen. I don't know, Raghav, it's a tough one to answer with a very precise point. So, but I think there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into that.
No, absolutely. I think we can call it a day, with the exception of maybe one question again, because there's so many people converging on this topic, right? And I think that might be useful for everyone as well. It's around metrics essentially, and measuring the success of a partner program, right? Whether you're starting out, whether you're going from 0 to 100 partners, or you're scaling from 100 to 1,000 partners, is ultimately the question essentially comes around, is it always about revenue, or what are the other key metrics, or how do you track partner program success?
Yeah, this is one of those, again, lessons learned, right? So if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said, yes, it's about revenue. But since then, I think both my thinking and frankly, the world has evolved. Revenue is a piece of it, no doubt. But I think also, hey, is a partner helping me, retain a customer, right? So retention, again, we talked about this earlier, but that's huge, right? So if a partner is playing a key role in delivering the value and driving a retention strategy, well, yes, you can link that to revenue, but it is ultimately also about customer success. So I think that becomes a key metric. Two is the partner, the set of partners helping me expand my set of use cases, which does a couple of things, which says, yes, ultimately it should expand and it should lead to new revenue as well. But it also implies I am less susceptible to being displaced by a competitor. Because the minute you start attaching additional, let's say, an ISV solution to a core, well, chances are you're becoming more fundamental to their business workflows, and you become harder to displace. So is the end goal growth? Sure. But are they also helping you retain an existing customer? Absolutely. Right. So customer success, growth in kind of footprint or use cases, these are things that you start to define, as the partner program evolves. And I do think that there should be, top of funnel metrics, and often the big question is, well, how many leads have they generated? Oh, that may be important, and that is important for a certain class of partners with whom you're doing actual co-marketing, co-selling. But there may be other use cases or other situations where the metrics are less about, top of funnel new business, they're about retention and growth in existing customers as well. So I think you have to look at the full mix. I think some of the articles I've published, that we talked quite a bit about that. But there is a set of, very dynamic set of metrics. And I'm also a fundamental believer that they need to be revisited annually as you launch and expand the partner program. What may be year one metrics and what do you actually care about are going to be different. What do you do in year 3 or year 5?
Awesome. Thank you for that, Avanish. I think we're on time now. We've got just a couple of minutes. So thank you so much. Appreciate everyone who's joined in. What we will do is there are questions that are unanswered. So I will position that to Avanish and get his responses on those aspects. I think we've had everything, right? We've had failed network. I've been talking on mute, apparently, going by the chat. I apologize for that. And we've got some incredible questions and answers. Thank you for everyone who've joined in. We will be doing other webinars with industry leaders as well. So stay. We will keep sharing updates on when the next sessions are. But otherwise, thank you so much for a brilliant session. Thanks, Avanish. Appreciate your time today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And again, apologies for the network issues.
No
quite embarrassing. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
And
Take
bye-bye.
care. Bye.